that choice? You popes, you say you're the vicar of Peter or much more the vicar of Christ. I'll tell you what you are. You're the vicar of Judas, because he's the one that you really represent. Well, of course, you can only imagine how the religious authorities objected when John Huss spoke out against church teachings and practices. They commanded that Huss's and Wycliffe's writings be burned, and they had a big bonfire in the courtyard of the palace there in Prague. They asked Huss if he was ready to obey the Pope's commands and stop preaching. He said, "Yes, I will obey his commands, so far as they agree with the doctrine of Christ. But when I see the contrary, I will not obey them, even though you burn my body." In the year 1409, the Pope issued an order that John Huss could no longer preach from his pulpit at Bethlehem Chapel. Huss and his friends refused to obey. After all, they felt Jesus Christ commissioned them to preach, not the Pope. And so Huss was commanded to appear at a trial for heresy and insubordination at Rome. Instead of going himself, Huss sent representatives. That didn't sit well with the Pope or his men in Rome, and so Huss was excommunicated. But what was interesting is in Bohemia, in what is today the modern-day Czech Republic of Prague, the area of that, John Huss had a lot of support. The people, and I should say a lot of his politician friends, they loved him. His friends rallied around him and made it possible for him to continue preaching. Huss was even elected to a prestigious post in a new university, but that didn't end his struggles with the Roman Catholic Church. In the year 1411, Pope John the 23rd called for a crusade against some of his political enemies in Naples. I just want you to think about this. Before that, they used to call crusades against the Muslims, right? Against the unbelievers. Now, popes are calling crusades against their political enemies in Italy itself. And so to finance the expensive war, he authorized the wholesale selling of indulgences. To John Huss, that was an outrage. The Pope was selling forgiveness for sins that weren't yet committed. He vigorously denounced the selling of indulgences, and the people of his city defended him, and 3 men were beheaded for opposing the papal doctrine of indulgences. The Pope declared the city of Prague, again, that's where John Huss lived and ministered, to be under a special curse from God. When Huss saw that his usefulness in the city of Prague was diminishing, he left the town and he started preaching and writing, traveling to various cities around southern Bohemia. But the Pope still wanted to put him on trial. So in the year 1414, easy to remember, right? 1414, the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund invited Huss to a special council to consider the charges against him. Now listen, this was, why do you think that before, when John Huss was commanded to appear before the Pope in Rome, why didn't Huss do it? Well, I'll tell you why. Because he was afraid for his life, right? He had friends in Bohemia. He had some political protection in Bohemia. You know, not enough as it'll turn out. But that's why he didn't go to Rome. Now, they invited him to another council, a council much closer, actually in Constance, which is not far away from, it's a lot closer than Rome is to Prague. And Huss agonized over the decision. He didn't want to go to this church council because he believed his life would be in danger if he did it. But this is what the emperor said. The emperor said, "I promise you, John Huss, that you will not be harmed. Even if we find you guilty, we'll let you go. You know, this is just a trial to determine the validity of the charges against you." So Huss agonized over the decision to go or not. He would be leaving his safe home and entering into the territory of his avowed enemies. But after all, the emperor promised him that no harm would come to him, and Huss eventually decided to go. He thought, look, maybe at the trial I'll be allowed to clear my name and make a defense for the truth. Sadly, it didn't work out that way. When John Huss appeared before the council, or actually, when he came into the city where the council was to take place, it wasn't long until he was very treacherously lured into a trap, and they imprisoned him in a dungeon close to the outlet of the city sewer before he ever appeared before the council. Then they held the trial. And they held the trial with John Huss as a prisoner, not as a witness. I'm sure you know what the verdict was. The verdict was guilty on all counts, and they even made up a few more counts that they hadn't thought of before. Before he was finally condemned for heresy, they allowed one public hearing where John Huss might be allowed to defend his case. But Huss was not allowed to defend or present his own views. They misrepresented his teaching, they condemned him as guilty of heresy, and they refused to let him even clarify what he was taught. When Huss was finally condemned, the officials at the council shouted, "We commit thy soul to the devil." Huss cried out in reply, "And I commit my soul to the Lord Jesus Christ." As they hurried him out of the council, they put a burning crown of blasphemy upon his head, and falling to his knees, Huss said, "Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. I am willing patiently and publicly to endure this dreadful, shameful, and cruel death for the sake of thy gospel and the preaching of thy word." On the 6th of June, he was condemned and burned at the stake, condemned by the same church that had promised him safe passage. When he arrived at the stake, they asked him once more to recant his views. And this is what he said. He said, "God is my witness that the evidence against me is false. I have never thought nor preached except with one intention of winning men, if possible, from their sins. Today, I will gladly die." And that's exactly what they did to him. Now, think about John Huss compared to John Wycliffe. John Huss, did he have the right theology? Did he have the right ideas? Yes, he did. John Huss, did he have the courage that was needed to make a stand like Luther? Yes, he did. Look at how courageously he died. But the third question is, did he have the political protection he needed to guard him against Rome? That he did not have. So if you want to ask, why did not the Protestant Reformation start with John Huss? It didn't start with John Huss because he did not have the third of the three elements you need. I think you basically needed three elements. Now again, I'm speaking from sort of a technical, historical perspective. God, if it was God's will, if it was God's timing, it would have worked out for John Huss or for John Wycliffe. Of course, I'm sort of detaching myself from the overall spiritual idea of it, and instead I'm looking very much at the idea that's contained, in the historical perspective. But don't forget, you need the right doctrines, you need the courage, but you also needed the political protection. We're going to see how all these three things came together in the person of Martin Luther. Now, one other thing I want to tell you about was the followers of Huss continued long after his death. As a matter of fact, the followers of Huss were displaced a few times, and they ended up occupying an area not far from Bohemia called Moravia. And then they became known as the Moravian Brethren. And when they were displaced again and brought into an area that today is Eastern Germany, they became instrumental in a beautiful revival that God wrought about 200 years after the Reformation. But that's for a later lecture. Thirdly, in this lecture, we want to consider Desiderius Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus is connected with the idea of Christian humanism. You see, one of the big influences that led to the Reformation was the Renaissance in Europe that took place starting about 200 years before the time of Martin Luther. The Renaissance prepared the mind of Europe for the Reformation. You see, out of the Renaissance came a way of thinking known as Christian humanism. These people were not so much interested in the reform of the church, but in the changing of society. Now, since society was dominated by the church, it was certainly related to church reform. But Christian humanism was an outgrowth of the Renaissance. It was an effort to reclaim classical culture over what medieval culture had become. You see, it was sort of these Renaissance people who started calling their own day, or it actually was a little bit later, but it has the same idea, where they started calling this age the Dark Ages. You got to admit, that's a pretty judgmental term, isn't it? And as we said, the Dark Ages weren't as dark as people may have think they were, but this was the judgment of Christian humanism. I have to say, in some historical perspective, they weren't all wrong. But secondly, they also called them the Middle Ages. You know, middle isn't such a great place, right? It's kind of neither